June 6, 1935. God, I can't believe that we're actually in the last of our sessions on the Thesaurus Rhythm Makers. 6 tunes left to go. They're great performances. I'm Loren Schoenberg, and I'm joined by drummer Hal Smith, guitarist Nick Rossi, who are not only exemplary musicians but also serious historians, and not just about their instruments, but about the scene and the world and the people who were in that world. And we've been having a lot of fun just going through these records. I'll tell you, when we started, I did not anticipate that we would do the Thesaurus Rhythm Makers, because we were doing all the studio dates, and so it's been just a joy. I'm wondering if I can just ask you just quickly to reflect on this experience of going through one day's worth of recordings, and just what you think about the band and about the performances. Hal, why don't we start with you? What's it been like?
It's like hearing an actual gig, a 4-hour gig where you have to mix in dance numbers and hot jazz and take an intermission here and an intermission there and play some requests along the way. But every one of these charts has just been beautiful writing, and the playing has been superb by everybody. Even a little clam here and there, who cares? In the grand scheme of things, they're beautiful performances beginning to end. I hate to see it end too.
Yeah. How about Gene Krupa on this date?
It's everything that's good about Gene Krupa and his playing. And he played, well, all the things I like personally, lots of press rolls. I can hear the 4-beat bass drum. I hear open crash cymbal to add excitement behind a trumpet or clarinet solo. I can hear his hi-hat almost developing on the job from the Chick Webb style, where he accents the 2nd and 4th beat to more of a smooth style like Joe Jones and Sid Catlett would play within a few months. And the other effects like the tom-tom, playing that would come to the fore on Sing Sing Sing, occasional turnaround with the rim shots and the cowbell, and it's just everything I like about drumming is on these thesaurus recordings. I love it.
I want to do here, I want to show a little clip of Gene Krupa talking about his playing during the Goodman days.
I was what they call a homemade drummer, but after I got with Red Nichols and got into playing musical comedies, and I saw the need for formal training, and I haven't stopped yet as far as trying to learn is concerned. A big part of my drumming is what they call independence, the ability to work this hand against this hand and this foot against that foot. I always believed that the drum was just as much a solo instrument as any other instrument. Heretofore, before that time, a drummer was used mostly as a timekeeper, and the guy to load the orchestra truck and sweep the bandstand after the job was over. And if the trumpet player made a mistake, the leader always shook his hand at the drummer and says, "Watch yourself," and so forth. And that's what I think was so terrific about the Goodman Jazz Quartet. The guys seem to think alike. Benny is the easiest guy in the world to play behind. He gives you a springboard. He just you feed him, and in turn he feeds you, and gives you a whole chain of ideas to go by. And the thing I liked about that particular group was the spontaneity of it. They very seldom played the same way twice. It was always according to how you felt. It never got below a certain standard, regardless of how uninspiring it was and so forth. I was interested in playing mostly. That was the idea. If I happened to be commercial at it, that was more or less an accident. But then when Goodman began to make pictures and agents began talking to me about setting up my own shop and so forth, and I started to worry about business, not the drums so much, you see. But actually, from a artistic standpoint, I like the other better.
Well, how interesting to hear Gene Krupa say that about his career before and after becoming a band leader. And I agree with him. I like his playing a lot more with Benny Goodman and also with Eddie Condon, where he was just coming by to forget his band leader chores and just sitting in and having fun. I think he played much better. I can speak from experience. When I'm a sideman versus a band leader, I play much better as a sideman. I don't have to think about payroll, or is somebody pushed out of shape because they didn't get a solo, or is this song going to end in time for the intermission, or all the myriad things you think about when you're leading a band and trying to coordinate four limbs on top of that and lead and point out solos and all that. It's a little bit much. And he had a different, obviously a different situation with a big band and arrangements, but still it takes a lot of your concentration away from the drums. And I don't think there's any better Krupa playing than the mid-1930s with Benny Goodman. That's the best of all as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. While you were talking up, I put up a little icon of applause while you were saying that, because I don't know if Nick feels the same way, but I feel the same myself. When I don't have to bring the charts and worry about all the band leading things like that, you tend to feel freer, when you don't have all that eye on your head. There was one comment he made there that I know Lionel Hampton and Teddy Wilson have said, and Gene said it, but it's very rarely ever talked about, I think, which is that little comment he made about Benny. When you play with Benny, you get a chain of ideas. And that Goodman, and he rarely has ever gotten credit for this. They usually say, well, he had all these great soloists and they came up with these things. No, Benny was the organizer of the arrangements and the order and who played when and the little backgrounds and when to cut it off and when to encourage it. And that's an aspect of his great musicality that is apart from how great he played the clarinet. And maybe that's partially why Wilson, Krupa, and Wilson never had bands as great as Goodman's, or small groups ultimately as great as the Goodman small groups. I mean, that's some people will argue with that, but what the hell?
No, but they didn't have Benny Goodman in their groups either.
That's the point. That's the point.
Yeah,
that's precisely the point. He
himself, in addition to organizing and doing all the things you just said, could play creatively endlessly. I think I'm thinking of a broadcast, a 1943 broadcast of Stealin' Apples with Jeff Stacey had come back to the band, that may be the one with Krupa or possibly with George Wetling, but it's chorus after chorus after chorus after chorus of clarinet, each one better than the one that just happened. Yeah. And it's totally different. I think I have 4 different versions of that. And some he just plays a couple choruses, and one he got totally inspired and just kept going. And I can't imagine what it would be like to play in a band with that going on. I mean, it's already a great band, but you've got this tremendous soloist just letting the lion out of the cage. And what a feeling that must have been.
Yeah, yeah. Nick, do you want to join in, or has it all been said?
Your initial question was about my general reactions to this experience of listening to this full day session, and I
has it been that long?
It's been yeah.
I apologize. Okay. I'm sorry.
So no, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. So I've been thinking about how much this experience has kind of retooled my thinking about the Benny Goodman band and where they came from, where they were at this point in time, right on the eve of kind of hitting it big, for lack of a better description, of becoming the Benny Goodman band. And also just, again, and this is something we all know as record fans and historians, you know, we get just a little glimpse of history through those record sessions. You know, we get the four sides on any given day that the band leader and, you know, possibly the A&R man from the record company and maybe someone else that has something to do with it, makes the decision to let us hear. And, you know, those recordings may or may not come out. Those recordings may or may not get reissued, you know, so it's, we're getting this very filtered view of history. And I think especially to fast forward to today, not to be the, you know, the old man telling people to get off my musical lawn, but, you know, I think even more so we live in this world where it's really easy to download a track or go and just hear this track out of context. You know, a friend, as great as this is, a friend sends you a track and you get to hear a little bit here. So it's like that filter becomes even more narrowed, right? And we're kind of out of touch with the context of these things. So to hear so many sides cut back to back, kind of not exhausting, but blowing through a good number of the charts in the band book from the time, you get a real good sense of, you know, the limitations of the band, the range of the band, the demands of the band, depending on what gigs they were, because they were not only playing radio shows, they were playing hotels, they were playing ballrooms, one-nighters, what have you. It gives a real great context to the band, and just it goes to show you all of the different tools, skills, and you know, musical devices that both the band and the individual musicians had to bring to the stands. And it's, you know, my respect for the individuals as well as the band is increased tremendously listening to these sides, particularly, you know, the rhythm section players. And to speak specifically about Alan Roos, you know, my biggest takeaway over the course of this session has been Alan had it pretty much all together. I mean, he really had so many of these devices that he would come to be known for. They were already in his toolkit, and he was able to employ them very readily. I mean, it's really remarkable in my estimation. He would increase his technique. He would better his technique. I mean, there's no doubt that he, in my mind at least, that he would become a better player from a technical standpoint. And he clearly kept on working on these things. And I've talked about this before. You know, you listen to his mid-40s recordings with people like Benny Carter and Arnold Ross and Harry James, and it's just like the technical level of that playing is so high. But it's, you know, the raw materials are already here, and they're already somewhat refined. You know, it's not like there's not a long stretch between here and what he's playing 10 years down the road. So it's been a thoroughly enjoyable experience from that regard.
And let's remember, he's 19, going on 20.
Yeah, right.
Oh, jeez.
Right.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, and one more thing I would like to say about Roos is that it's also it's great to hear how much he had developed from the Van Epps model already at this point in time. You know, he had probably been taking lessons with George probably a year prior to this, you know, if not a shorter window, if not more recently. So to be presented with a technique, a concept, and to develop your own take on that technique and concept, and to do so at such a young age is just, you know, he's a lot of guitar players do talk about Alan Roos as one of the greatest ever, particularly in this world, and this is just a much more evidence in that point of view.
You know, one thing that your comments and also Hal's about Gene Krupa, as we do the comparison with others, you know, drummers, people know that they have their own styles, you know, and horn players, you know, for the most part. But one of the things, you know, that you've brought to the fore here is that Lawrence Lucy, Bernard Addison, Alan Roos, George Van Epps, and others. You've mentioned John Trueheart, even Al Norris, you mentioned once, I remember, from the Jimmy Lunceford Band, that in the context of that role, they were all great individuals. And people who were into that stuff would argue just as much about one as they would about Coleman Hawkins or Lester Young or Sid Catlett or Buddy Rich or something like that. And that's wonderful to know, and something I'm so glad is coming out here. One thing I want to recommend to our listeners out there is some of the best writing, contemporary writing about this band and this era was done by Otis Ferguson. And Otis Ferguson's writing on jazz have been collated. They are available. Otis Ferguson, you can remember that name and look it up. And he writes about these things, and something that was just said reminded me of it, that he was at the Carnegie Hall concert. And he had also been on the road with the Goodman Band. He wrote early pioneering articles and criticism, first articles in the States about Teddy Wilson and just all kinds of great stuff. Anyway, he says the Carnegie Hall concert for that band was just another night. And he's right, because it became iconic, because everyone who loves that music, you memorize that LP set, and every note is just the greatest thing ever done. But when you listen to the Savory air checks, or you listen to the old Goodman, the Savory things that came out in the 50s, you could at least make the case that they're superior to Carnegie Hall, and it's just a matter of your own personal taste. And that's something about this session. I'm just kind of echoing what both of you said, that it's like being with the band on a one night, or hearing them when they're up, hearing them when they're not quite as up. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Let's go to Ding Dong Daddy from Dumas. A Spud Murphy arrangement of Ding Dong Daddy from Dumas. Two solos there besides Benny, Art Rollini on the tenor and Toots Mondello on the alto. And it's funny, when the quartet, the Benny Goodman Quartet, famously played Ding Dong Daddy. And I always assumed that it came because, Lionel Hampton had been Lionel Hampton was Louis Armstrong's drummer on the famous recording of Ding Dong Daddy. And I figured, well, Lionel got in the band, and he said, why don't we play this? You know what I mean? Sure. And so they played it. It was already in the band's book in 1935, which just goes to show, how dangerous it is to make assumptions.
Hey, I'm taken aback by that arrangement. I thought it would be a little bit brighter than that, like the Armstrong version. And it was certainly a contrast with what the quartet did a little bit later on. Nobody really got a chance to cut loose there except Benny, but I'll say this: he made the most of his solo sections there. Yeah. I even heard some Johnny Dodds in his playing there,
Oh.
with the long kind of blue notes that Dodds had played, and wonderful Gene Krupa ride cymbal through quite a bit of that recording. Really played exactly what needed to be played there to make it go.
Yeah. Nick?
It was interesting. One thing I was kind of straining to hear at one point in time was I thought, and Hal or Loren, maybe you heard this, I thought Frank Froba was doubling the bass line a couple of those times,
Oh, yeah.
which was creating this kind of strange echo effect. And, we talked about these kind of rippling rhythm effects in the rhythm section. And I think for my ear, this is an example of it just being kind of distracting. There was something going on with the lower end of the piano register that Harry Goodman seemed to be fighting for some space that I was trying to make sense of. Because I think, it's funny, we've talked about the role of the rhythm section or someone in the rhythm section kind of taking control of the tune. Mm-hmm. And I almost felt like this was an example of Harry Goodman kind of taking the lead on a tune for once. And maybe that was partly Frank Froba doubling with him that created such a strong low end on this particular side.
Yeah. A fascinating kind of oddity in the Benny Goodman repertoire. It later did become the province of the small groups. Let's keep moving, and let's go to the next tune from the session, which is lovely to look at.
Well, we heard some wonderful Alan Roos moments, the almost plucked strings or harp type effects that we've heard on so many of the kind of slower tempo arrangements, not only from Roos, but also from his predecessor, George Van Epps. And again, it's another one of these time capsule arrangements. It's these charts wouldn't last too much longer in the Goodman book. And the styles at large would change soon enough that an arrangement like this would soon be history. But again, it's a great reminder that it's summer 1935, and this is a band in New York City that has to pay bills and get band jackets paid for. So
Sure.
it was nice to hear, and nice to hear those embellishments.
Hal, anything on this one?
Not very much. I don't know what to say about it. It's a nice hotel band arrangement, and it's certainly well played. But other than those little harp figures by the guitar, there's hardly any jazz at all.
Yeah.
Not even any Zinke Cone from Frank Froba. It was all hotel band piano on that one. This is what I was referring to as it's like listening to a band play a 4-hour gig.
Right.
This was a request for one that Mr. and Mrs. Throttlebottom could dance to, and they did.
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable to hear because you can't have everything be hot stuff. You need something to contrast with all the other hot arrangements that we've heard. I would do anything for you and Bugle Call Rag and things like that. And it's just this is the lull before the storm.
Yeah, it's interesting because even what we know about the band, the famous Goodman band, 36, 37, 38, all we really know is what exists on radio broadcasts, which is when they were on a microphone going out to the world. And boy, it would have been fascinating to hear them do a one-nighter and have somebody just write down the set list. You know what I mean? Because Lord knows, maybe they'd pull this out when they played a college prom or something like that. Even in later years, somebody would request a tune. They still had the back of the book. Okay, play it, Like we heard some of those Spud Murphy arrangements show up in 37 and 39,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really good. Let's keep going, and let's go to a tune that Al Jolson introduced in Go Into Your Dance. This is She's a Latin from Manhattan.
I really enjoyed the little rumba section by Gene Krupa on that. It sounded a lot like the kind of thing Chick Webb would play on his breaks on Go Harlem or the solo on Harlem Congo, where he's tapping everything in front of him and getting a nice variety of sounds. wasn't a really jazzy arrangement, but it's very pleasant and be nice to dance to, I'm sure. I heard a little bit of hi-hat behind the trumpet solo, and that sounded to me like Pee Wee Irwin from the tone and the phrasing.
Huh. It's funny. We both heard early on in this session a solo that we both were sure was Nate Casebeer, and the personnel listing, which we show at the beginning of every one of these segments. I put in Nate Casebeer. We took out maybe Jerry Neary. And so we're assuming that he's in there. I've been with you on most of these. On this one, I'm not really sure whether it's Casebeer or Irwin. But vive la différence. I'm sure that some of our listeners out there, are also have their votes too. And it's just wonderful to be even calling the name Pee Wee Irwin and Nate Casebeer. And we'll get to hear Casebeer on the great Krupa date, which we will listen to coming up in a couple of months. But was there anything else about this performance? I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Oh no, I just like what Gene played when he did that little turnaround in the rumba section, and that also foreshadows what Dave Tuff played with Tommy Dorsey on things like at the Codfish Ball, the introduction, where he's just going all around the drum set and hitting everything in sight, but making it very musical.
Right. Nick?
Yeah, I was looking forward to Gene's break on this one, knowing that it was coming and not quite remembering what it sounded like. So that was a nice treat. I really liked this song. I don't think we heard it on any of these sessions, but there is a Let's Dance broadcast, I believe, that has Helen Ward singing it from the beginning of the year, the same year, 35. So I'm kind of fond of the novelty aspect of this particular tune. As far as what we heard from the rest of the rhythm section in Roos, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing we wouldn't expect. There was some really nice throaty 4/4 playing, and by throaty a little more in the mid range, a little more of a almost kind of a husky sound coming out of the guitar. Maybe he was digging in a little bit more, playing with a little bit more force. But it was nice to hear a slight change of timbre in the guitar from what we've heard from the last couple sides.
Yeah. Well, let's go. These three are credited to Spud Murphy. And again, as we've said in the previous shows, the only predictable thing about Spud Murphy arrangements is that they're unpredictable in terms of the style, because he's all over the place. And again, I'm positive that's what Benny wanted, because the Fletcher Henderson's thing sounded like this, and the others sounded like this, and Spud Murphy could do any number of things. But he did have his own style, like on that chart, that beautiful chart of I Surrender Dear, and certain things where he really just hauls it all out. These really do sound, it sounds like a put down, and I don't mean it that way, workmanlike. In other words, Benny needs a chart on this tune. The chords are all right. The voicings are good. It's perfect. Go. It's not a considered piece of work. Now, let's go to a Fletcher Henderson classic that will become a key mark of the Goodman Band. I know that you know, and of course this has links right to Jimmy Noon and so many other people. All right. Benny Goodman's big band version of I Know That You Know, arranged by Fletcher Henderson, the first version of it by Goodman, and the association for Goodman, of course, would go back to one of his great influences, the New Orleans clarinetist Jimmy Noon, who recorded a famous record of it in 1928 with Earl Hines and Doc Poston, that wonderful band that he had. And Noon, had actually studied classical music, or studied the clarinet, with Franz Schepp, who Goodman famously studied with, along with Buster Bailey and many other people in Chicago in the 1920s. And Jimmy Noon, without going into too much great detail, was known for the fluidity of his playing. The two icons of New Orleans clarinet, and of course there were more than two, but the way that it's been simpled down to us, and I think it's fair to say, would be Johnny Dodds and Jimmy Noon. Again, there are many others, and they're almost like at opposing ends of the way of playing the clarinet. It's fair to say that Johnny Dodds plays the clarinet like a blues singer would play the clarinet. It had a beautiful tone and a beautiful feeling for the blues, and as much facility as he needed. Jimmy Noon was coming more like what we might call the French school of clarinet, and a certain kind of legato playing and a lot of fast finger work. And it was funny there to hear Benny take up an octave or two. Jimmy Noon's characteristic of one of these classic New Orleans clarinet arpeggio things that Benny could famously do in the lower register, and here he does it up high. So that might have been what's on his mind. He also just might have been thinking about a pastrami sandwich. But nonetheless, he really played the hell out of it. Let's open up the gate here. Who's on first?
I heard the Jimmy Noon influence right away. And in fact, on my notepad here, I have Noon with an exclamation point.
I knew it.
Yep. As soon as he did that little triplet figure, that's so wonderful. And I wonder if he had anything to do with telling Fletcher Henderson to include the verse, because the verse sets up the chorus so nicely, but hardly anybody plays the verse. The original Noon record, of course, had it, the 1928 version, but not the later one that Noon did in the 1930s. It had disappeared. The Lionel Hampton record that has Buster Bailey and Johnny Hodges as a tribute to Doc Poston and Noon has no verse, but it really sounds wonderful here. And it does set up the hot music that comes afterwards. I loved hearing the guitar up in the mix, so to speak. He really added so much to this. And once again, our hero Harry Goodman was staying in 2/4, but making it move. It never sounded like it was standing still at all. It just had a wonderful forward momentum. Gene didn't overplay at all. He just played what needed to be played, made it go. He played some interesting rim shots to punctuate the melody, but didn't really let loose. He did that though on an Eddie Condon broadcast several years after this. Condon featured Joe Marsala playing I Know That You Know, and it becomes a Gene Krupa feature. As soon as the clarinet solo is over, Gene just took over, and it's one of the best things I ever heard him play. It's almost like he was keeping this in mind. I didn't get to play anything on that thesaurus version. I'm going to let it all out now. It's really sensational. We get to hear that sometime. And
I thought the guitar and bass sounded wonderful on this. I mean, Gene took a bit of a backseat for once, as Hal said, and it really allowed Harry and Alan to step out front and just kind of lay down the law, as it were. The other thing is I hardly noticed, if there was any, I hardly noticed any piano on this, which kind of spoke to the amount of musical information that both the chart was communicating, as well as how much musical information a guitar and a bass can communicate over the course of the song while maintaining the rhythm. I think coming to this music from a contemporary point of view, where we're not as accustomed to seeing or hearing a rhythm guitar in a jazz band context, you kind of think the piano needs to be there to play the chords, to supply the extensions, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a great example of how rhythm instruments could both function in their primary role as timekeepers, as well as communicate enough musical information to really support what was going on around them. I thought particularly under Benny's solo, the rhythm section, the guitar and bass sounded fantastic on this.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, when you listen to the Ellington Band on commercial records, and certainly on the less on the live recordings, but when you listen to the studio records, I would say Duke doesn't play. There's nothing coming from the piano 50% of the time. Mm-hmm. If you were to go across all the records, at least up through the 40s or 50s, and then when he plays something, it means something. Mm-hmm. And you're right, so many times. Listen, I'll tell you something. Let's listen to that well-known live performance of the same chart, the great band with one of the very last performances of Gene Krupa, right before he left the band in early 1938, with a special guest sitting in with the big band on I Know That You Know.
The faculty will dig in, and I mean deep, and Lionel Hampton throws in the vibraphone for extra good measure. Turn it on, Professor.
What a contrast. That was remarkable how different those performances were. It was really interesting. What I heard from the guitar chair in this particular instance is, Alan Roos, who's still with the band at this point in time, obviously, really laying into that backbeat feel, which, a lot of guitarists from this time period into the 1940s would play on faster numbers. It's a way, economy of motion. You can play a faster tempo with more kind of momentum of your physical body by laying on that backbeat. So I wasn't surprised at all that's the approach he took. What I heard, though, over the course of the song, as Gene kind of became more and more, how should we say, enthusiastic, he, Alan just started digging in, and it kind of became almost like a survival technique, right? Where you're just kind of chunking out as much as you can without necessarily worrying about nuance. So, by the end, the guitar really starts getting drowned out. I would say, 2/3 to the song, the guitar starts getting a little bit drowned out. Harry Goodman played remarkably similar on both versions, which I thought was kind of interesting, and certainly helped create some bedrock. But wow, I'm looking forward to hearing what Hal heard Gene do on that recording, because he was something.
Oh yeah, I remember, if I'm correct, the liner notes to the Treasure Chest version of that refer to it as a high wire performance, and it certainly was. I mean, yeah. I wouldn't have thought bands would play it much faster than Jimmy Noon did on his original record, but they just almost doubled it there. And what wonderful playing by Gene Krupa. I mean, that's hard. That is a difficult tempo for anybody to keep up with, but he did it and made it sound easy. And he threw in so many of the Chicago references there that I just enjoyed it. I heard him play some turnarounds on the tom-tom, like the fourth beat of a phrase and then the first beat of the next phrase, boom, boom, that kind of thing. And behind Benny, he played really emphasized the press rolls like Johnny Wells, Jimmy Noon's drummer, did on all the records with Noon, particularly on an out chorus. Johnny Wells generally didn't play choke cymbal, at least on recordings he didn't play ride cymbal, but he'd really dig in and play accented press rolls on the last chorus, and Gene did that. And at the very end, he did a neat Chicago trick via Andrew Hilaire, who was the drummer with Jelly Roll Morton's Red Hot Peppers on the famous session in 1926. At the end of Black Bottom Stomp and a couple of the other ones as well, he plays afterbeats on the tom-tom, where normally a drummer would play the last chorus on a choke cymbal or ride cymbal or rim shots on the snare drum. He played the second and fourth beats on the tom-tom. I'm sure that was under the direction of Jelly Roll Morton, because he liked to tell all his band members how to play, and especially the rhythm section. But Gene does that again on China Boy with the trio, not long before that Treasure Chest version that we just heard. But that's that tom-tom on the out chorus is something that almost disappeared, that hardly any other drummers played, especially into the swing era.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, you tantalized me with that Eddie Condon version with Gene. Okay. So as long as we're in a Gene Krupa mood here, why don't we go and listen to that now? We can come back and spend some more time with Gene Krupa.
Okay. You see what I mean? That was supposed to be a feature for Joe on the clarinet, but I think that was a feature for Gene, and he certainly made the most of it. That's all the good things he learned from Baby Dodds and Zooty Singleton and Chick Webb, and with the Gene Krupa stamp on it too. I mean, I can't imagine mistaking him for anyone else on that particular performance. And what a wonderful, wonderful example of his drumming.
So as we go to our last two tunes from the Thesaurus sessions, and just remember, these guys have been playing, at this point, 49 tunes in a row. I mean, it's phenomenal how great they sound. The brass players, just everybody, that's a lot to play almost nonstop. I guess they had a break for lunch or something like that. But let's start with Stomping at the Savoy. This is one that they famously recorded for Victor early in 1936, and it became one of Goodman's best-selling records of all time. And anyway, here it is, the first version in the studio, June 6, 1935. I'm curious about that. That the Goodman Victor always has that signature guitar sound, kind of bouncing off the bass, and it was a quintessential sound of the Goodman Band in '36 and stuff like that. And
this is very distinctive, right? I mean, this is, in a lot of ways, this is what people think of when they think of Alan Roos, because you hear that heavily accented backbeat. And it's that boom chick feel or effect with the bass primarily playing 1 and 3, at least at the beginning of the tune. Although Harry straightens out and plays a lot of 4 in this tune, which to great effect. But Roos is accentuating the second and the fourth beat of each measure, and it has a very distinctive sound, and it has a sound that a lot of people associate with Alan Roos because he used it so often, and it was a big part of his sound during his Goodman years. Although, as we've heard over the past few sessions, and as anyone who knows his playing, it wasn't the only way he approached these songs. But I think it was just something that you mentioned, Loren, about the drums on the Victor version perhaps being slightly under-recorded as well, that becomes the hallmark, the rhythmic hallmark, the kind of thumbprint of that record.
You mentioned Chick Webb had recorded Stomping at the Savoy, and before this version was done, it's interesting that Gene kind of went the other direction from what Chick Webb did. He didn't feature himself. He just stayed in the background. I did hear one little reference to Chick Webb coming out of one chorus. He'd been playing closed, the stem of the hi-hat and with the cymbals closed. And he started playing it open with the cymbals opening and closing and increased the volume on that. Yeah. That's a Chick Webb signature. And he played those random rim shots that we like to hear that weren't necessarily punctuating a certain part of the melody. They just, that's where it occurred to Gene it would be good to put in a rim shot, and he did. He played some very nice ride cymbal for a couple of choruses and some eighth note accents on the bass drum behind the trombone. Da-dump, da-dump, that kind of thing that still wasn't very common during that time, but if the recording equipment was good enough to pick up the bass drum without overloading the system, you could do that kind of thing. Chick Webb didn't even do much of that. He just generally tended to play straight 4/4. But I like the fact that Gene laid back a little bit on this one and let the bass and the guitar be heard so well. Once again, it's that wonderful blend of the rhythm section, whether they're playing in 2/4 or 4/4 or mixing it up. It just sounds like a marvelous way to play.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm just thinking now about this is one of the few tunes that the Goodman band, that Goodman recorded with the big band and the small band for Victor. There's very few. I might be the only one. Might be one more. But, and in the quartet version, Gene's all over the place. So in the quartet versions of Stomping the Savoy, boy, he's really let loose. But this might be Benny's concept of the tune. I mean, here's the band long before they're ever famous, and yet there's already the drums will be in the back seat, the guitar will play the afterbeat. That's kind of what he wanted there. Absolutely fascinating. Trombone there by Jack Lacey. Well, we go to the final tune from the Rhythm Maker sessions. And this is Down South Camp Meeting, and we'll follow it with a live version. there you have it. Down South Camp meeting 50 years apart. We heard the 1935 version, then we heard the last Benny Goodman version from a television show that we did in 1985 at the Marriott Marquis Hotel. And I guess the only solo really there is Benny's. So we got to hear a particularly beautiful solo by Benny, and fun to see the band, playing for dancing. We were much too busy trying to read the music and not screw up to have much of a chance to actually look at the dancing. That one lady reminds me of Irene Dunn in Showboat, if you know what I mean. But nonetheless, that was really, really, really great to see. But let's go back to the first version and the version from the Thesaurus Rhythm Makers. I'll just start by saying clearly that's a band at the end of the day. There are some notorious clams there. And, that's, I think I'd almost say of the entire 51 tracks, that's the only one that I think Benny would like to quash. All the others, even the ones that have little clicks and clacks, who cares, man? The performances are so wonderful. And that one still has a lot going for it, but it is clam-ridden, unfortunately. Man, Gene Krupa really, poof.
Yeah, he sure did. Everything he played, the hi-hat, those random rim shots, they all worked so well. I noticed he put one of those Chick Webb bass drum figures in the chorus, the boom, boom, that fit so well that he would use that till the very end of his career. This is another early example of it, but Gene sounded like he's real happy that that's the last tune and he's going to cut loose a little bit on it, because he played little bits of solos under other solos and under the ensembles, lots of press rolls, really digging in and turnarounds on the tom-tom, and he made everything work so well. He sounds like a happy drummer, and always like to hear that. I also liked that wonderful trumpet solo by Nate Casebeer. Sounded like he still had all of his chops at the end of the day. Well, I think that was Casebeer because his playing on that last tune reminded me of the way he played on the transcriptions by Seeger Ellis and the Choirs of Brass. And he had a very similar way of phrasing to Benny Strickler, the trumpet player who was the star soloist with the Choirs of Brass. Wow. And to me, in my ears, they played very similar, and the trumpet on that last tune sounded like Casebeer or Strickler playing that kind of southwestern phrasing with a little bit of a hitch in it, not a darn the torpedoes full speed ahead type of playing. Yeah. Just a little bit lazy. Of course, it's at the end of the day too, but just the basic sound reminded me of Casebeer.
I wasn't 100% sure, but I think you're right, because Pee Wee Irwin, it's hard to think of a Pee Wee Irwin solo, especially from this era, where he doesn't go up high at some point and kind of show that he had that high stuff happening. And that solo was solidly in the middle register. And luckily, we'll get to hear some great Nate Casebeer coming up on some of the other Goodman sides, and specifically on that Gene Krupa date with the last roundup and all that kind of stuff, which I can't wait to hear. Nick.
Well, speaking of relaxed, I thought Roos played remarkably relaxed on this track. One thing we've talked about his playing is how crisp his beat was, and he's got a much bigger beat on this particular song. Even when he's playing backbeats, he's letting a little bit more of the chord ring out, letting it ring out a little bit longer, and just has a nice kind of relaxed pulse. But at the same time, he's still keeping great time. It's perhaps he's tired, end of a long day, taking a slightly different approach to things, but the beat's still there. And it gives Gene Krupa that safety net to do as much as he does. The fact that Harry Goodman and Alan Roos are such solid rhythm players and such solid rhythm section mates. Although to be honest with you, I was kind of keeping my ear on Krupa most of the time, just trying to figure out what he was going to do next.
Yeah. Well, and as we talked about, they had just done Stomping at the Savoy, where he really was under wraps. So this might be like, who knows. Well, listen, we've come to the end of the Thesaurus Rhythm Makers, all 51 titles. And I believe in the first episode of this sub-series, I read a little bit, I quoted from Russ Connor's book, and his first book was called BG on the Record, which I know we have here. I know Hal has a copy. I'm not sure, Nick, if you have it or not, but it's, it's a great old book. And then he revised everything. For this one, Benny Goodman listened to his legacy. Then there was a follow-up one called Wrapping It Up, and I love that one because on the back picture, I'm not sure if it's on the back or on the back flap, there's a picture of Russ, and he's like this. He's in the motion of like, it's really funny, He had to have chosen that on purpose. And then his legacy is carried on by a wonderful discographer who lives in Rochester, New York, called David Jessup. And Dave has continued the whole Russ Connor thing going, even published his own work of Benny Goodman discography, I believe published by the same publisher. And he keeps that particular flame burning, which is really wonderful. Let's just salute all the players who we've been listening to for 51 titles in a row. And that would be on first trumpet. I believe that the first trumpet chair would be split between Pee Wee Irwin and Ralph Musillo. Ralph Musillo was in the band for a few months here. He comes back in the 1943 band at the Hotel New Yorker, where we have Jess Stacy, Alan Roos, and Gene Krupa. And Jaime Schertz are all coming back in 1943. Nate Casebeer, we're going with Nate on this record date, although sometimes it says Nate Casebeer or Jerry Neary, but I'm with Hal on this one. I think it's fair that we can definitely put him in there. Jack Lacey on first trombone, Red Ballard on second trombone, as he always played, with a few lovely melody solos that we heard. The Reed section, Toots Mandello and Jaime Schertzer, Art Rollini and Dick Clark on the tenors, Jaime and Toots. Sounds like a Damon Runyon story or whatever, right? Toots and Jaime, two characters in Guys and Dolls, that's what I meant. Okay. On the altos, I knew both of them. I'm a lucky guy. Jaime's real name was Herman, and Toots' real name was Nunzio and Herman. And, of course, as we mentioned, we've heard baritone sax, we've heard flutes, we've heard clarinets, so we have to put that in the Reed section, too. Frank Froba from New Orleans on piano, Alan Roos on the guitar, 19 years old, just about to turn 20. Harry Goodman on the bass, Krupa on the drums, of course, Benny Goodman on the clarinet. And I got to tell you, gents, it's been a real joy. This whole series isn't, we're nowhere near done, but this particular project is something I couldn't imagine doing. And then once we got into it, I remember a few times saying, like, all 51 titles, how much can you say about it? And I almost think, that we could go back and do part 2 and we'd have as much to say. And we'll be back, jumping to the Victor sessions of June 25th and July 1st, 1935. Bunny Berrigan is going to be in the band. And interestingly enough, and I can't wait to hear this, George Van Epps comes back for the Victor record session. So until we see you, we'll see you again next time. Thanks, Hal. Thanks, Nick. I'm Loren Schoenberg, and boo, 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 boo.